Katrazin sat down to watch the match. As the match began, he thought to himself that he already knew the outcome. He believed that Ernesty was not prepared. Katrazin considered Ernesty's main weakness to be surprise. Katrazin acknowledged that Frank had plenty of surprise tactics. Frank's ability was future sight, allowing him to predict his opponent's movements. Katrazin doubted Ernesty could surprise Frank at all. Even if Ernesty had a trick up his sleeve, Frank would see through it. Katrazin acknowledged that Frank only needed one successful surprise to defeat Ernesty. Katrazin knew Ernesty was primarily an offensive player with weak defense. As soon as the battle started, Frank rushed towards Ernesty with a punch. This sudden aggression surprised Katrazin, as he remembered Frank as calm and patient in the mid-year tournament. As Frank tried to punch Ernesty, Katrazin wanted to tell Ernesty that Frank's chantless magic wasn't unique and Ernesty could copy it. Katrazin quickly dismissed the idea, reasoning that Ernesty hadn't practiced chantless magic and wouldn't be able to execute it effectively, even with his unique ability. Katrazin theorized that Frank was attempting to surprise Ernesty, who likely prepared for the Frank from the mid-semester examination. As Frank's punch neared Ernesty's face, Ernesty blocked it with his sword. Frank anticipated the block and threw a kick towards the side unprotected by the sword. Ernesty blocked the kick with a mana barrier, a defensive technique Katrazin had never seen him use, even in sparring matches. Katrazin had never considered Ernesty using defensive techniques, especially a mana barrier. Katrazin began to suspect that Ernesty might have some hidden abilities. Judging by the initial actions, Frank hadn't activated his ability yet, perhaps not having marked Ernesty. Katrazin was still unable to figure out how Frank marked his opponents. After his kick was blocked, Frank continued punching, kicking, and slashing at Ernesty rapidly, giving him no time to react. Frank already seemed to know which attacks would hit and which would be blocked or evaded. Seeing this, Katrazin realized Frank hadn't used his unique ability from the very first move. Katrazin believed that Frank was surprised by Ernesty's mono shield. Two theories came to Katrazin's mind. Either Frank couldn't predict something he hadn't seen before, or his ability required close proximity and eye contact, which they hadn't had before exchanging blows. The fight continued, and Katrazin considered that eventually either Ernesty or Frank would run out of stamina. Katrazin noticed Ernesty was taking the brunt of the beating, while Frank remained unscathed. Suddenly, Ernesty jumped backward, creating distance. Frank immediately came chasing after him. Unexpectedly, Ernesty vanished, leaving his sword behind. Ernesty's sword fell to the ground. Ernesty was nowhere to be seen. Katrazin then realized that he and Frank had forgotten Ernesty's true unique ability, self-belief. Ernesty could believe something to be true as long as he knew the theory of how to execute it. Invisibility might be impractical for someone of Ernesty's level, but if only theory was needed, Ernesty could achieve it. Katrazin realized that this changed the entire dynamic of the fight. Now Frank had no way to predict Ernesty's moves. Ernesty could beat Frank up, but he no longer had his sword. Picking up his sword would reveal his location to Frank. Ernesty couldn't use super strength to knock Frank out because he could only focus on one ability at a time. Katrazin wondered what Ernesty's next move would be. Would he try to chip away at Frank's health? Ernesty would still be at a disadvantage because Frank could play defensively, conserving stamina. Katrazin decided to wait and see what Ernesty would do. Ernesty reappeared directly in front of Frank and used super strength to deliver a punch. Frank was hurt even though he was in a defensive position. Ernesty became invisible again, then reappeared under Frank and kicked his left foot. Before Ernesty could disappear again, Frank pushed his sword down, hitting Ernesty. Frank felt the sword connect, and a small amount of blood appeared on the blade. The viewers could see that Frank had hit Ernesty, inflicting a shallow cut. Ernesty reappeared near his sword and picked it up. People noticed the cut on Ernesty's shoulder. Everyone anticipated Ernesty playing his trump card, whether it was a known ability or a new one. Ernesty charged towards Frank, who was ready. Frank turned to the side and evaded. Katrizin believed Frank anticipated another attack and was waiting for the opening. However, Ernesty pretended to lose his balance and fell. Ernesty's apparent stumble was a ruse. As Ernesty fell, he dropped the sword to his other hand, kicked Frank in the face, and used the other hand to cut Frank's leg. Frank did not anticipate this swift counterattack. Frank tried to leap backward, but the cut on his ankle affected his landing. From that point on, Ernesty's movements changed drastically. His attack style became highly specific and imbalanced. Katrizin couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was a crude version of the technique from his own hypothesis. Ernesty was using a crude version, likely based on the description in Katrizin's hypothesis. Ernesty was doing a good job, considering he only had a partial understanding of the drunkard's ballet. Ernesty had the core idea, but lacked the crucial element that brought it all together. The drunkard's ballet required wrapping the sword in mana to inject it into the opponent and negate their ability. Ernesty couldn't imitate the style while simultaneously infusing mana into his blade. While the stadium saw Frank struggling, Katrizin saw Ernesty's struggle. Katrizin knew Ernesty was nearing his limit. Ernesty was running out of time and energy, while Frank wasn't. Frank grew accustomed to Ernesty's patterns. Frank realized the cuts were minor and that he needed to take on Ernesty's blow directly. If Frank could withstand a hit from the sword and defend himself, he could throw Ernesty out of the ring. Ernesty anticipated Frank's change in tactics. Ernesty tightened his grip on the sword and leg muscles. By this time, Frank realized what was happening, but it was too late to defend properly, even with his unique ability. The 2 layers of mana shield that Frank created were not enough because Ernesty executed the moonless silent cleave. The crowd saw Frank's arm getting chopped off. Frank created a spike out of the ground that stopped Ernesty's hand from moving further. Katrizin thought of his master's explanation of an action so powerful and with so much emotion behind it sometimes radiates so much that people can see the future happen. Frank put his hands to the ground and used earth magic to summon 6 pillars from the floor that generated a complicated pattern that would restrict Ernesty's movement. Frank jumped from branch to branch and said Ernesty should see the spectacle before his defeat. After numerous attacks, Ernesty activated enhanced feet and jumped into the air as a last resort. Frank extended the branches from his pillars toward Ernesty. In the air, Ernesty executed another moonless silent cleave. Frank, surprised, summoned all the branches from the pillars to create a shield around himself. The shield was cut, but Frank managed to escape the full force of the attack. Frank prepared to kick Ernesty out of the arena upon landing. After executing the cleave, Ernesty threw his sword at Frank, distracting him. Ernesty became invisible again. Instead of playing defensively, Frank went on the offensive, activating Mana Burst. Frank exuded waves of mana, imbuing it with the essence of the ground, making Ernesty sluggish, weakening his ability and his visibility. Ernesty became a stationary target for Frank, who kicked Ernesty out of the ring and won the match.